Ladies and gentlemen, we are live from the Isle of Man in the UK. This is John and Mike's MMA Corner.
Okay, we're talking now with, you could say, the founding father, the foundation, who laid the foundations for the UFC on. That's a good way to describe it, would you say, Mike?
Yes.
Well, I think agree, help me.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of how we would, just if you described him as the UFC was a building, he would be the foundations. He was the one who...
You know what I've done with the book and what I've done with the film is that, I was the creator of the UFC. There were three founders, me, Bob, and Horion. Yeah. But I was the creator of the UFC. I had to sell everybody else. I had to sell Bob, I had to sell Horion.
There you go. Well,
okay then. So the only sperm that found the egg, then, yes. Shall we say?
Exactly.
Okay. So yes. With that, we have Art Davie.
And so thank you for coming on and talk to us and join us in this. I say it's like a nostalgia for we want people to never forget how the UFC came about. And luckily enough, it's been put into words. It's been put into a book that you and Sean Wheelock worked on together, which I read it, loved it. Is it legal? It's a great book. It's out there for people to read. When you did the book though, was it crazy to come back and speak just fluently about the memories and how it all came about? Because I imagine you just didn't sit there every day after everything was over. Was it nice to come back and talk about it with Sean?
I was very fortunate in having Sean's support. He approached me in 2011. I had been approached by a number of people, including, the guy who edited and produced Gladiator and Grappling Magazine, Todd Hester. And I had not done the book, not been ready to do the book. But when Sean came to me, we began talking about it. And I realized Sean was an enormous fan. He had watched the thing at his mother's house when he was only 19 years old and was an enormous fan. So revisiting that time was a great thrill for me. I was very fortunate, and Sean has pointed it out since then, that I had great notes coming from the advertising business. Whenever I met with someone, a client, a distributor, a retailer, I used to make notes of that meeting. So I had great notes of my early conversations back in the day when I was hooking up with Horion and Semaphore Entertainment, HBO, etc., and the fighters. I had great notes. But sitting down with Sean was a great thrill because, in many cases, I had put a lot of those things on the shelf and not had forgotten them, but had not revisited them in a while. So redoing the book, and it took 7 months of writing, editing the book, was a great thrill for me to go back and re-experience again the excitement that I felt in those early years from 1992 to November 12th, 1993.
I was going to say, it must be like coming across a family photo album or something like that you haven't seen for years and flicking through and like your memories suddenly coming back and, something like that.
Absolutely. And, Sean and I did a great job, and Sean was my great support both in editing and in research. So we went back and opened up the door again to people like, Trent Jenkins, the alternate, with the first UFC, people I hadn't talked in more than 20 years. Revisiting again with Gerard Gordeau and Taylor Tooley, and so many of the early fighters that were part of the process. Going back and revisiting the people that I had approached, like Dennis Alexio, the great kickboxer who was in the film Kickboxer with Jean-Claude Van Damme in '89. It was a great opportunity to go back, like a photo album, like you said, and revisiting those memories and remembering what had taken place many years before.
And we're going to talk, obviously, about... We won't talk about the book, obviously. We are going to talk about the book in the sense of... We're going to talk about the beginning of the UFC, which obviously is in the book, but we won't talk about certain bits. We'll leave some bits so people will buy the book to read it, because it is worth reading and it is worth purchasing. But what I loved about the book, and when I was reading it, was one name that stood out to me, and his name was Pat Strong. And we've got to say, we've got to be quite thankful that Huron didn't listen to Pat, and you did. But you put the time and effort in. I found that you put the groundwork in to build that kind of relationship with Huron, to build that. There was what got you to UFC. They got the UFC going. For Pat Strong, he just pitched the idea, and that was it.
Well, I had met Pat Strong years before, and he had done a film with Bong Hoo-san, the great Korean Taekwondo, Tang Soo-do specialist. I think I have that right. And they had done a movie with Ed Parker, and the movie went directly to Netflix. It was one of those movies that never made it to the theaters. But I had met Pat back in the day when I was in the advertising agency business, and he wanted to see at the time if I had any contacts to distribute that movie. And I remember going with him to the house of the individual who had financed it, a wealthy dentist in Beverly Hills, California. So my relationship with Pat Strong went back long before the UFC. And then years later, in the Gracie Academy, when they opened up the new school over there on Carson Street in Torrance, who was at the opening was Pat Strong. And Pat had supplied a proposal at one point, before I met Rorion, to Rorion Gracie for the World Free Fighting Championship, in which he basically tried to come up with a scheme and an idea to bring together the various martial artists to compete on an even footing. But like so many ideas that had been developed at the time, it didn't have all the details worked out, and it really was an attempt to bring this type of an event to the video stores, the brick and mortar video stores like Blockbuster at the time, which are now since gone. My idea was unique in that I saw it as a tournament. That's what I had. The one idea that I thought was very unique. I saw it as a tournament. I didn't see it as an individual event with various bouts. I saw it as a tournament to try to find the apex predator, the great white shark. The second original idea I had, which Pat Strong didn't have, was that I understood intrinsically it was a pay-per-view event. Hey, big-time boxing and big-time wrestling in North America was pay-per-view. We had to structure this so that it could be taken to pay-per-view. That was my advantage, and that's what Pat Strong didn't have. And quite frankly, Rorion told me that when it came to the Gracie Challenge, he had been approached by any number of people who came to him and said, hey, let's do a kickboxer versus Hickson on the beach. Let's film it and let's put it in a video and try to get it in Blockbuster. I had two unique ideas, the tournament and pay-per-view. And with that, and a clear idea that that's what the event was all about, I really was able then to move forward and recruit not only Rorion, but Bob Meyerowitz at Semaphore Entertainment. I was able to present this to HBO and to Showtime because I had a clear idea what this thing could look like. And the Showtime guys and the HBO guys, that's exactly the language they spoke. Pay-per-view.
Yeah. Brings the money in.
They needed a business
some money.
sort of
it's all about the dollar
involved in it, yeah.
And that's the great thing about the book was when you talked about how your idea that you originally pitched this world's best fighter to not even to Huron, originally to another company because you were for an advertisement company, and
yes.
Then they rejected it, and then you just kept the idea and you just never let it go because it, like you say, it stemmed a little bit from when you were younger, when you were, I say, a child, so to speak, when you did a bit of boxing, and as a young lad, as a wrestler, and you lost basically.
Well, the great advantage that I had was, number one, I was not a martial artist expert. I was not a black belt in anything, but I had enough experience with my boxing, and then wisely getting a blue belt over at Gracie Jiu-Jitsu enabled me to understand what this grappling was going to mean. And, researching this whole phenomena, going back to Pancrase, 648 BC, when it became a big event in the original Olympics, I realized that when you brought a grappler and a striker together, 8 times out of 10, the grappler would win. So I needed to understand grappling. So my advantage is that I really wasn't an expert in the martial arts, but I knew enough about them, therefore, to become a decent matchmaker/booker. And secondly, that I was primarily a marketing guy. I was an ad man by training and trade. So I could look at this as a business. I could look at the customer and say, who are we trying to attract? Who's this young guy, somewhere between 18 to 34 years of age, that's got to step out and pay $19.95, $24.95 on a Friday night to see this on pay-per-view?
Yeah, I wondered as well after reading the book, I wonder what it would have been like if it had happened in Brazil on Halloween.
Well, that's a very interesting story, and I kind of touch base on in the book, is that Rorion had a good friend in Brazil, who had been very famous in the producing business, and he had brought Frank Sinatra to Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro, and we had approached him. He had gone to school in L.A. He had gone, I believe, USC or UCLA, and had gotten a degree. He was a professional promoter by training and trade. And I talk about it in the book that he was coming to Los Angeles. We met with him and looked at the possibility of doing this in Rio de Janeiro on Halloween in 1993. And his name was Lulu Niemeyer. His family is very famous in the promotion business in Brazil. And he told us, he said, my problem promoting this in Brazil, he said, I now do most of my stuff in Argentina. He said, my problem with the Brazilian customer is you'll sell 20,000 tickets, but only 5,000 will pay. The other 15,000 will sneak under the wire, under the fence.
Yeah.
So he said, so let me tell you, there's going to be some problems in promoting this in Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo. He said, I know both cities. I've done events in both cities. But he cautioned us about the possibility of doing that first event. Also, Semaphore, by the time that we would, eventually put together a deal in '93 to do pay-per-view, they were apprehensive about doing that first event in a foreign country because whatever difficulty we were going to have in doing it in America, they would be compounded by the difficulty of bringing, 40 individuals, the fighters and their entourages and production staff down to Rio de Janeiro for the first event. So while we considered the excitement of doing this in Rio that first time, the logistics and the mechanics of doing it in Rio, argued against it, and I think we made the right decision. I, of course, had done my homework and found out that Colorado had a loophole in their laws which would allow bare-knuckle fighting in that state, and that, in addition to the fact that they had pioneered the state of Colorado in the LLC corporate structure, the limited liability company. At that time, there were only 3 states in America that had the LLC format. It was perfect for our investors because if you invested $10,000 and everything went sour, you could only be sued for the $10,000, not for anything more. So the LLC structure and the loophole allowing bare-knuckle fighting allowed us to bring the first event, November 12th, 1993, to Colorado.
And and that's what was great, like I say, about when I was reading the book. When I was reading through the book, obviously, and I get to the chapter, wow, promotions, and I was like, I don't know this one. I haven't heard of this promotion. Wow. I was like, was this before the UFC? And then that was the template name that you put in place, and War of the Worlds, and I thought it was. I actually really liked it as well. Wow promotion. I thought that can't quite catchy. I quite liked it.
Well, the WOW Promotions idea was a great one in the sense that we knew that I knew I had a great idea. I knew it was a great idea because I was bringing back, as John Milius confirmed for me, I was bringing back the glories of the ancient Greek Olympics. Pancration by 648 BC was added to the Olympic program. Within 4 Olympic Games, it became the most popular event in the ancient Greek Olympics. And it was our event. It was grappling and striking with no eye gouging and no biting. So all I was doing was bringing back the glories of the ancient world. So WOW Promotions had a very solid idea. Even though HBO passed on it and so did Showtime, I was fortunate, and then I got Semaphore Entertainment. They were only doing comedy and concerts on pay-per-view. They didn't have a franchise. So when I presented it to Campbell McLaren at Semaphore, he was hungry and waiting for something like this. He didn't understand it real well, and neither did Bob, but they both suspected that I was right, that this would attract young males, not only over North America, but as we've seen in the last 22 years, over the entire world.
Well, I mean, let's be honest, it's simple to understand what attracts more attention. If you're at any sporting event and some trouble creates somewhere, whether it be on the pitch or in the crowds, everybody watches the fight. It doesn't matter what the sporting event is that you're at. And
Jorge used to always say that to me, and he was right about that too. He said, if you're at a football game or a hockey match and something breaks out in the stands, before you know it, everybody's got the camera over there to seeing what's going on. And that's the kind of raw excitement that we had inside the octagon. By capturing that and presenting that, the fans were saying, my God, they got a sumo wrestler versus a karate champ? You can't even see this in the movies. I mean, it was unique all by itself.
Yeah. I was going to say, and people always like that sort of, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, with boxing, I mean, you can pretty much. I mean, yeah, you still don't know for sure. It is a fight, and endings can happen at any point. But you can get an idea. You can say, well, this guy tends to do this every fight, but with this new sport, nobody knew. No one had a clue. Or very few people, should we say? It's and also with the bare knuckle side of it. I mean, I used to be a big follower of boxing, and back in the UK, going back a few years, bare knuckle fighting used to be. It was more the gypsies that tried to keep it going. Like, after the Marquess of Queensberry sort of laced on gloves on boxers, there were a breakaway few that wanted to carry on the bare knuckle. And then when you got two big fighters, I'm trying to think if it was. I can't think of the guys, but they got a big name for themselves in the UK, and they were bare knuckle fighters. And the police said, we won't allow. It was, I forget where it was going to be, but it was in some small arena or something, or gentleman's club. And the police said, right, there's no bare knuckle. It has to be lace gloves. If it's lace gloves, then it's okay. So what they did, they put gloves on the fighters. They walked to the ring. They then surround it with security, so even the police couldn't get past the security. And the security didn't lay a hand on the policeman or anything, but they were big guys, and no one could get past. And then what the fighters then did was they then took their gloves off and started fighting almost instantly, and that's how they managed to get that match going. Because it was illegal in the UK, so. Even an ungloved fight is an unseen thing now by most people.
What was interesting is back in the day, there was a bare knuckle fighting champion in the UK by the name of Joe Savage. Do you remember him?
Rings a bell, Joe Savage.
That's back in the days of. I'm cracking my memory. Yeah.
I'm thinking about Joe Savage versus Bert Cooper. And Joe Savage, I was trying to recruit him at one point for the UFC. I wanted a bare-knuckle British fighter to come into the UFC. I think this was around UFC 6 or 7. But there was this undefeated bare-knuckle champ by the name of Joe Savage in the United Kingdom. And that's who I wanted to bring in. I couldn't make a deal with him for some reason. I forget what happened.
I don't know. He would have probably been arrested when he returned home or something, But...
one thing I'll touch on, if you don't mind, is we won't talk about one specific bit in the book, because I think what I liked about this part was it added it was like an underlaying intensity to the story. It was the pay-per-view deal, the contract with the pay-per-view. I found that part of this when you're reading the story. I found that added a bit of attention to it, and a bit of. Kind of every time you're reading it, you're getting a little update on what's going on, and then you go to another part of the of the beginning of the UFC, and every now and then touch on it's almost like a tension builds up, and obviously there's more to it in the book to read, ladies and gentlemen. But the relationship you had with them, with Bob and Campbell, how did you? You said in the book though that you kind of got a kinship with Campbell. Over that period of time, you felt like he was your friend in the end of it, rather than the business side of it wasn't there.
Yes, Campbell and I hit it off. Campbell was a bright guy. He had been involved with the Catch a Rising Star nightclubs here in the United States. He was a graduate of Berkeley with a degree in fine arts. Campbell was a creative guy. He didn't know anything about fighting at all. Neither did Bob Marowitz. But Campbell had a great sense of what we were doing from an entertainment standpoint. And to some extent, and John McCarthy loves to tease him about it, Campbell and Joe Cloris, Don Cloris, D-O-N Cloris, who was the public relations consultant for the NBA and the NFL here in North America, were the two architects of the advertising approach, the public relations approach, that talked about death, and that a fight could end in death. And that was a two-edged sword, because by emphasizing that in our ad campaign, we were courting the media and the politicians, and in fact encouraging them on some level to attack us. So it was a two-edged sword. Like McCarthy points out, it may have attracted a lot of fans to the event, but it also attracted a lot of negative publicity, including Senator McCain, who turned it into a campaign to ban us. So there was a two-edged sword there. But my relationship with the Semaphore Entertainment was a complicated one. They were looking for an entertainment franchise, and I needed a pay-per-view TV partner.
Yeah, it is. And ladies and gentlemen, when you read the book, you see there's more and more to this story, and it's I quite enjoyed that bit of the book, really. That kind of that story just kept popping up every now and then as you read through the chapters.
Yes.
Going on then to when you were recruiting your guys, you spoke about how you wanted certain fighters, you were trying to get certain guys, and obviously you were trying to look for certain boxers, and they were wanting a horrendously high, appearance fee. But then you got a certain gentleman in Art Jimmerson, who was a legitimate fighter, who,
yes,
he had a great, I think he was in the top 10 ranked at the time. He was for me, when I read that story, it almost felt like it was a sad character reading that. I know it's real, but I felt like a bit of sadness. I felt, when I've read it, I thought there was something about Art that I don't think anyone quite knows what was going on at the time, maybe.
Well, Art Jimmerson is an interesting story because I had gone to the Kronk gym, to Emmanuel Stewart's gym in Detroit, and been turned down there. They laughed at me. They said, "Look, kid, you're chasing rainbows. You're never going to get a professional heavyweight boxer to compete in this event with these karate boys." So I was, insecure and nervous at that point about being able to recruit a boxer. I went to Joe Frazier's gym in Philadelphia, and while I was able to recruit two great cutmen for the first UFC, the great Leon Tabbs and the late great Sam Solomon, who was in Cassius Clay and Sonny Liston's fight in Miami in 1964. He was in Liston's corner. But I wasn't able to get any heavyweight boxers out of Joe Frazier's gym. So when I finally hooked up with Phil Adams, who was an attorney in St. Louis, who represented James Bonecrusher Smith and Leon Tabbs, Leon Spinks, the former heavyweight champion, who had defeated Muhammad Ali in a heavyweight championship fight, I was getting pretty frustrated at that point. And everybody was turning me down or asking me for ridiculous appearance fees. And I was limited to how much I could pay for an appearance fee. We paid for Taylor Tooley's appearance fee, and we paid for Art Jimmerson's appearance fee, quite frankly. Those were the only two fighters in UFC 1 that got money above and beyond what was in the tournament. So when I recruited Jimmerson, he was due for a bout with the great welterweight, middleweight, and light heavyweight Tommy Hitman Hearns about 6 weeks after the UFC. His attorney, Phil Adams, was negotiating to put that fight together. He was on a 15-fight winning streak. He was 29-5 as a record. He was ranked 10th in the world by the IBC and the WBC. He was a legitimate cruiserweight and heavyweight contender. But he was in an interesting point in his life where when we offered him a $17,000 appearance fee, for the event, he later used that money as a down payment on a house in East St. Louis, and his sponsor in St. Louis began to pay him a weekly salary, a couple of $1,000s a month, to just train. And after the UFC, his boxing record, when you take a look on boxingrec.com, it went really south. He began to lose. Him coming into the UFC was interesting because he was in the gym in St. Louis with Ernest Hart, who was teaching and trying to show him that, look, here's what the grapplers are going to do. And he was intimidated by that. The true story is when he gets to Denver, by Wednesday, he's in the gym, and Big John McCarthy, who had been training with Hoyce, got together with him, and they're starting to spar a little bit. And Jimmerson says, "Hey, what is that Gracie boy going to do if I throw a jab like this?" So John says, "Hit me with your best punch." So Jimmerson says, "What do you mean?" John said, No. He said, "You try to hit me as best you can with a jab and hook off the jab, see if you can take me out." So they start sparring around. McCarthy ducks the punch, slips back, goes into a double leg takedown, takes Jimmerson to the canvas, mounts him, puts his big fist in Jimmerson's face and said, "Now what you going to do, boy?" And Jimmerson says, "They're going to break my arm, aren't they?" He says, "Yes, they can, and they might." So Jimmerson, by Friday afternoon, when we had the dress rehearsal for the event that night, I said to him, show me your trunks. He had that beautiful pair of trunks that said Art King Jimison on them, black silk, with the gold letters. And I looked at him, I said, you look a little nervous. That night in the dressing room before the event, I said, where are your gloves? Where are your shoes? Oh, he said, I didn't bring them. I said, what do you mean you didn't bring them? You're a boxer. Where's your gloves? Where's your shoes? He said, I didn't bring them. He's looking at me real blank like I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I could tell that he wasn't there. He had left his fight in the gym. He was gone. So I sent my kid brother over to a sporting goods store in a suburb of Denver, and we got a pair of 10-ounce gloves and a pair of Nike or New Balance running shoes. We couldn't find any boxing shoes. And I finally got those to him at the last minute. He said, hey, these are running shoes. I said, beggars can't be choosers. Put them on and get ready. So the true story on Art Jimison, and you're right about the fact, he did not bring his best game to the event that night on November 12th. He wasn't there. He was gone. He was lost. And he came into the event, as you can saw, he quickly, wound up. And later on, he told me recently in October in Syracuse, New York, at a martial arts fan expo, he said, I thought there were people holding down my legs. He thought somebody else had gotten into the ring. He had never been mounted and had his feet hooked. He was shocked. He said, I thought there was other people in the ring holding down my legs. So Jimison was lost. He was the, other than Zane Fraser, he was the most lost guy in Denver. Really.
Yeah, I think everyone else was lost when they watched the replay and there was no submission put on Art Jimison and he tapped to nothing and you were like, what did we all miss something?
Yeah, he had, believe me, when I looked at his eyes, and then I'm in the truck with Mark Lucas, my director, and Michael Pilot, the line producer, and I see he's got one glove. I bought him 2 gloves. I sent my kid brother with $300 to get a pair of gloves in Arvada. And we got the gloves at the last minute. He shows up with one glove, and Mark Lucas, the director, turns to me and says, Art, what the hell is he doing? I had a look on my face like, I don't know what he's doing. I was in a state of shock. At the last minute, he decided he was going to leave one hand free so he could hit Hoist with a left hook. But he didn't even bring that. So you saw that event, he did not bring anything to the party. The funny story with Art Jimison is he's still doing appearances, he's still signing autographs, and he's giving away copies of that one glove all over the country.
I was going to say that only wearing one glove was probably a blessing, because if you was to say if you got 1 million MMA fans, okay, into one room, and you said to them, name 3 things that you remember from UFC 1.
Yes.
It would be probably the tooth getting knocked out. It would be the fact that the smallest guy in the tournament wins.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it would be some guy turning up with one glove.
Yeah, Jimison has turned that into a whole career. He's gotten himself a job teaching boxing at a UFC gym. I ran into him at fan events here in the United States. He's the happiest guy. He takes pictures with fans. He's got a giant one glove. I pose with him. I did a video with him in Syracuse in October. He's the happiest guy. He's turned that one appearance in MMA into a whole career. I give him a lot of credit for it because, if anybody competed in the UFC and did nothing, you might say that Jimison's at the top of that list.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
But having said that,
Yeah.
if you said to people,
He didn't
name 3 of the name 3 of the originals,
Yes.
he might be one of the guys you'd name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The boxer who showed up with one glove would be the name you'd come up with. So it's funny how that whole first event, it's Taylor Tully's tooth and it's Art Jimison's glove, and it's Hoist being the skinny, smallest guy in the event to win it. But I agree that Jimison he did not show up with any kind of a game or energy for the event. And believe me, by the time he walked into the octagon, I knew that I was not getting what I would hope to get from a boxer, quite frankly. It just works out that way sometimes. It's an unpredictable business, and, fans don't understand what it takes to get into a cage and fight. It is a tremendous. It's not a team sport. There's nobody to help you.
No.
Yeah, they're not there when it comes to the first whistle, shall we say?
What I found is it's when the bolts go on the door that's what hits me when I step in the cage and the bolts close over. That's when the reality hits you. That's when I go, oh shit! I'm actually in the cage on my own, and there's someone across from me that wants to ram my face into the ground. You know, it's just
Yeah.
that's what hits me. That's when it hits me. And it is people who have never done it. You like you say, they just don't understand what that whole kind of adrenaline, that ride of emotions is like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, that first event was extraordinary, and I dedicated my book, Is This Legal?, to those 10 men.
Yep.
Because you have to remember that, you know, recruiting those 10 guys, you know, with Trent Jenkins and Jason DeLucia as the two alternates, you know, a lot of guys had turned me down.
Yes.
Boxers, wrestlers, kickboxers, famous martial artists, they had all turned me down. So getting those 10 men to put their careers, their reputations on the line took a lot of guts. Those guys were the X-15 pilots of the early era. They had to be pioneers. They didn't know what to expect, really. And when I was talking recently to Mark Lucas, who was the director of the event for Semaphore, he said, Art, in the truck, all of us guys, including the cameraman, kept turning to each other and saying, are the cops going to show up? Are we all going to get arrested? Is anybody going to die? Is Taylor Tooley going to throw somebody out of the octagon? Nobody knew what to expect. That was the beauty and the excitement and the drama of those first events, is that we were blazing a trail and a path.
Well,
It was extraordinary.
I would imagine even the fighters, if they didn't say it out loud, they probably at least said it in their minds at least once. Is this legal? You know, it's...
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, because...
Well,
I must admit,
John,
I can remember seeing UFC number 2 on the shelf.
Yeah.
I've been a fan of martial arts and boxing for a number of years at that point, and I remember seeing it on the shelf, and I kept walking past it, and it was amongst some of the WWF stuff and all the rest of it, which I'm not a fan of, and
Yeah.
I would pick it up and I'd have a look at it, and then I'd put it down and I'd walk back, and eventually I thought to myself, well, I'll buy it and I'll have a look at it, because I wasn't sure. Number one, is it real? And number two,
Right.
what exactly was it? You know what I mean? It was, you know, and having seen it the first time, you're like, Jesus. And I was in the army at the time, and I was the only person on the camp with a copy of this video. And I would literally I was only a young guy, and I would literally turn around to anyone else that had an interest in fighting or violence or anything like that, which in the army there's quite a few. And I would say, have you seen this? And you'd bring them into your room, and you'd have them all there. You know, you might have sergeants and staff sergeants there and all sorts. And you'd be playing it, watching it, and they'd be like, whoa, you know, Christ, like, is this real? And I went, you can't do that fake, you know. It's happening right there, you know. You can't fake that, you know. Everyone's seen Rocky, you know, or Bloodsport, and you know, there's no slow motion bits in it, like, you know. It's oh yeah, you know, it was a good way to get popular, put it that way.
It was, yeah.
You know, Sean Wheelock tells that story too, that he was also a wrestling fan in the early days, and when he got his mom to order this pay-per-view, and he watched it when he was still a college student on his mom's television, he said that his first reaction in looking at the advertising, thinking, maybe this is a work, maybe this is some sort of a wrestling show. So the first bout, he says, when he sees Taylor Tooley and Gerard Gordeau in that 20 seconds going at it, and Taylor getting bloodied and his tooth being knocked out, you know, and Gerard Gordeau breaking his hand, having a tooth embedded in his foot, he said, I knew at that moment it was real. But you got to remember that at Wednesday of that week, Shamrock turns to me and he says, Art, is this a work? I said, Ken, we've been all through this. You know, Ken came in from Tuesday from the Pancrase event where he competed against Funaki in Fukuoka, and he lands in Tuesday in Denver. So Wednesday I see him over at the gym, and he turns to me and says, Art, is this a work? I said, Ken, we've been through all this. He said, well, Art, there's some guy in this thing, we're going to wear karate pajamas. He's referring to Hoist. He said, the kid's obviously an amateur. He said, I said, Ken, I've told you it's a shoot. There's no prearrangement here. There's no prearranged endings. You bring what you bring. You do what you do.
There's no script.
He still asked me on Wednesday. He was wondering if it was real. That's a true story.
Yeah.
I tell you, because you mentioned Ken Shamrock, while I remember, I love in the book, it's about Patrick Smith,
Pat Smith.
how Pat Smith afterwards at the ball, so to speak, afterwards when you had the dinner on the following evening, and he came up to you and he said, I want that bastard. I want Ken Shamrock. I love that. He wanted to come back, and the incredible thing was when he did come back, all of a sudden he had this grappling game. He had this submission game, and I love that. I love that little bit of the story.
Well, when I had first gone up to Denver, I spoke to Karen Turner, who was a kickboxing promoter sponsored by Coors Beer in the Colorado area, and she recommended two guys to me. She says, number one, I'm going to recommend Pat Smith to you. He's won the Sabaki Challenge, which was a bare-knuckle karate tournament, which I'd read about in Black Belt magazine. And he said, I'm going to recommend Trent Jenkins to you. He says, he's just a journeyman, but he's a good guy, and if you need a spare fighter, he's somebody I'd call on. I went over to Tiger Kim's gymnasium on Colfax Avenue in Denver and saw Pat Smith working out, and I was very impressed. He at that time was being trained by Bobby Lewis, the former U.S. amateur boxing team's Olympic coach, and he was being trained by Bobby down in Las Vegas to do some pro boxing. And he'd won the Sabaki Challenge earlier that year in '93, and I'm watching him up at Tiger Kim's gym. I signed him up. He's actually the first fighter I signed for the UFC, not Hoist. I didn't sign Hoist up till late July, early August. I signed Pat way back in May when I was up in Denver.
Yes, because you wanted Hickson, but there was
Yes.
There was a slight, almost family feud going on that wasn't.
Yes.
They didn't come through. Yeah, and I understand why you wanted Hickson. He was the.
Oh yeah, he was
the
he
king.
was the killer of the thing.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, I actually think that if you'd have scripted it, if you could have scripted a first fight in tournament,
Yeah.
you couldn't have scripted it as good as it went. To have the first fight in the first moments be like an oh shit moment,
Yeah.
so straight away you think to yourself, like, with the first fight, it's like,
Yeah.
Christ, it is real.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we've got like another load of these fights coming up, and to have the smallest guy
Exactly.
win. It's the guy in the pajamas, so to speak, that everyone was saying about. To actually win the thing against all these big,
Gorillas.
killers.
Gorillas. They're all massive. Yeah, they're all huge. Yeah.
I don't think any sort of screenwriter could have put it into could have scripted it better.
Well, I was lucky and fortunate in one respect. Given my advertising background, I had a good feeling for the fans and what I thought they wanted. So there I was early on, recruiting somebody from Draka. One of the early posters for UFC 1, I had the Russian martial art Draka. I had those guys, was cultivating them, and they had a guy they wanted to put in. Finally, we couldn't put the deal together. But I was adamant about getting a boxer and a sumo wrestler. If I had been a traditional karate black belt guru in California, I wouldn't have gone that route. One of my strengths is that I was looking at the big picture. Bringing in somebody from Penjak Salat, bringing in somebody from Kung Fu Sansu, bringing in somebody from Muay Thai. I was always thinking of the big picture, thinking from A to Z, from Aikido to Zendo. I had to find guys from all over the world. So that was one of my great strengths. And I also had a great feeling for talent. John McCarthy teases me about that to this day. He says, sometimes you bring in somebody that I knew wasn't going to be a great fighter. He said, but you had a sense of that he was colorful, or that the fans would want to see that. So that was my desire to bring in Koji Katao, Emmanuel Yarborough, Taylor Tooley. I thought that the fans should see that, how would a sumo guy do? We got a karate guy, we got a kickboxer, we got this guy, we got that guy, Olympic gold medalist, Mark Schultz, Kevin Jackson. But how would a sumo wrestler do? So one of my great strengths was the willingness to look all the way across the martial arts, the broad dimensions of the martial arts, and say, I'm going to find somebody from everything. And the second thing was I had a great sense of who had charisma. That's why I found Tank Abbott. That's why I found Kimo Leopoldo. That's why I found a Randy Couture. I was always looking at the personalities as well as their fighting ability, because I knew, quite frankly, along with Campbell, we were in the sports entertainment business.
Yes, you had to find a balance. And what I loved about I just want to touch on the book a little bit one more time, was it was the relationship, the blossoming relationship between you and Huron Gracie. You could, as you read the story, and then it came to the event, it came to the night, UFC 1, when you bumped into each other backstage, and you both in your tuxedos, and it was almost like the relationship had, it kind of met at that point where you knew that you both were on the same wavelength, and it was a beautiful, touching bit, that really. I really loved that part of the book, the kind of story between the two of you.
Well, Orion and I had a very interesting relationship, and we were brothers of another mother. What we had in common was that we both had we took delight in being able to expose a lot of the martial arts gurus and what Orion used to call the frauds. There was an awful lot of people out there in the magazines saying that they had mastered the Shaolin month death touch, and they could knock somebody out with with a pressure point and all this stuff. So Orion and I both took delight in being able, for me as matchmaker and booker, to recruit all of these guys, these gurus, and find out who was the real guy. Where we differed was I saw the event as an end in itself, and Horion always looked at it as a means to an end. His desire to be involved in this was to get Gracie Jiu-Jitsu across. That was his primary motivation, and he and I always, if we ever battled about anything, it was about that, because I always used to say this event stands on its own. He used to tease me and said, well, you might turn into Art McMahon. He was teasing me about the fact that I would become a version of Vince McMahon. He said, you're going to be Art McMahon when this is all over. I said, no, Horion, but this is an entertainment. And by the UFC 5, when I was looking at adding time limits, judges, rules, gloves, that was the end of the Gracies in the event, because they knew it wasn't Vale Tudo anymore. It was time limits. And quite frankly, as Horion always said to me, we need time to cook a guy on the ground.
Yeah.
Yes.
And time limits were going to work against that. So while we were very close, in fact, Corey used to always say, when I grow up, I want to be like you. Instead of having a belt around my waist, I want to have one of those fancy $100 silk ties around my neck like you wear.
And look, you talked about how the sport evolved under your eyes. How you went from UFC 1, and like you say, after a few UFCs, everything just started changing again. And the sport,
yes.
the style changed. Everything started evolving. It went fast, but then you brought in these names that nowadays they're just kind of T or T's, like you say, Randy Couture, Vitor Belfort, Tank Abbott, even there's a handful of guys that you just think these guys are synonymous with MMA, and you brought them in, and you obviously you met them and you came across them, and you said you loved working with Randy and Frank Shamrock, Randy Couture and Frank Shamrock as well.
Yeah. Well, half of the guys that are in the UFC Hall of Fame are guys that I booked and matchmaked. I take a lot of credit for that. I had a great eye for talent. I just did. I just had a great eye for who I thought the public would click with. And that's important because, when you get right down to it, whether you're in soccer, tennis, golf, American football, it's all about the stars. It's all about personalities. They have to have great skill, but they also have to have a certain human dimension. If you want to talk about an athlete that understood that better than anybody, you have to say Muhammad Ali. He became larger than boxing, larger than life. Today, Ronda Rousey has done a good job over the last 2 years, I think, of creating a persona and a personality that transcends even MMA. So I think, having a sense of who has that kind of charisma is important. And I take a lot of credit for the fact that we were lucky in getting some of the great ones that we did get. But I was very fortunate after the second UFC. People were calling me finally. They were showing up on my doorstep. Oleg Taktarov was sleeping on my doorstep when I came to work one day. Didn't speak a word of English. Had a videotape showing him competing in Russia. And I had to get my brother-in-law, who spoke Russian, to talk to him because I couldn't speak any English. So I was fortunate, and at that point, a lot of people were showing up and saying, hey, I want to be in this. How do I get in?
He does a lot of film now, he does.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if somebody wants to be a true sports star, you have to have people to care about you. It doesn't matter if you win or lose, you have to have the audience care about you. And
absolutely.
There's been many world champions that have come and gone, and where the crowd didn't actually care for that person, they're not remembered. You know what I mean? And they might have been hugely successful as far as the sport's concerned, but then the financial side and the actual, as far as getting yourself known, you have to win the crowd. You know what I mean? One way or another. Whether it's by winning or whether it's by losing, you have to win the crowd. And only a small handful of these manage to do it.
A very good example of that in boxing is Larry Holmes versus Mike Tyson. You know, a lot of people don't remember Holmes. He used to complain about the fact that he was the forgotten champion.
True.
He was very good. He was a great boxer puncher. But, you know, you look at somebody like Tyson, he had an ability to attract people above and beyond boxing. He was the man you love to hate. You watched him to see whether he was going to win or lose. You know, he was a larger-than-life character. That dimension is very important in sports. You know, you have to have that ability to be able to capture the public's attention. And you can't invent that. You have to find it. If you're a promoter, your job is to recognize it. And if you're a manager, your job is to help develop it. But intrinsically, it's part of someone's personality. It's God-given.
Yeah, you either have it or you don't, and you know, you can't manufacture it. You know, I mean, I've seen it before. Like more so in the boxing days, promoters used to try and create it around a fighter, but when it comes to the actual fight itself, you can tell whether that's there or not. You know what I mean? And you know, certain fighters would just fail and they would disappear, and the crowd would forget about them fast. You know, it's.
But the UFC is starting to bring more faces that are more kind of, you can relate to them more. They're starting to bring more fighters in, and the way they're also marketing people as well is quite clever. They're also educating the fighters. They do the summits now where they educate fighters on social media and how to, you know, address the public in a way.
Exactly, how they are when they meet them face to face, you know, and
it's a very smart thing to do, and like you said, that's marketability. You know, it's how you got to sell yourself. You know, you got to be, if you're buyable, that means you're a more valuable person. If you're more valuable to the company, then you're worth more. It's all about ones and zeros.
Yeah, well, also Muhammad Ali actually he spoke about autographs. And he would say whenever he was asked for an autograph, he would always try his best to sign one. And he said, like, for me, it's moments in my life. He says, but that person that I've just wrote that autograph for, he says that will stay with them for the rest of their life. You know, and I think that attitude has to sort of come through. And, okay, you know, you are going to get paid. You are going to either have success or not. But that extra piece comes down to how you know, that extra that you give of yourself, like, you know, and not everyone has that.
Absolutely. You know, I'm excited about this new Kickboxer reboot film. It's I know John Claude is in the cast. They've got David Bautista from the WWE, who was in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's quite a figure, both in weightlifting, powerlifting, wrestling, and had one MMA bout. Yep. And I understand that George St. Pierre has been cast into the old Jean-Claude Van Damme role. So, you know, you're seeing today that some of these great MMA stars, some of them may have some film career opportunities. Certainly Randy Couture has done well with Sylvester Stallone with the Expendables franchise.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, GSP was in the Captain America film as well.
Very, very briefly.
Yeah, it was brief. I mean,
let's be honest, I could have done that bit. It was that short. Yeah. But it is a start, and, you know, because fighting's not forever. Well, okay, exactly. You need to tell Ken Shamrock and a few others and that it's not forever, but
it isn't.
You know, realistically, for most fighters, it's not forever. It's a short time. And then you need to look elsewhere. You know, are you going to open up a gym or whatever? Or, you know, for a few, there is the film industry. And
and there's other ventures. But with UFC 200 coming up, you know, it's just that number alone, 200 UFCs. I know they've had fight nights as well.
More like 300, but...
it's more than probably 300, but... It's crazy to think that from when you did it from UFC 1 and then it's coming up now to UFC 200, how do you look at it when UFC 200 comes about? You know, how do you look at all the sport now?
You know, I've done a number of interviews last year since the book came out, and one of the things that many interviewers would ask me is that, you know, what did I think about the fact that it has expanded, it has grown? And I would comment and say, you know, I'm very excited about the international expansion. I have Facebook friends in MMA from Thailand, from Bangkok to Oslo, Norway. So I'm fascinated by the fact that I have friends in Afghanistan who are in MMA who correspond with me. It's become an international sport, and yet we originally saw that's where it was going to go. I remember John Milius and I used to talk about the fact that, you know, eventually in the future there would be 50 million people one night watching some Ultimate Fighter be crowned. That's where this was going. Other than soccer, other than what the world considers to be the real football game, the martial arts is the most ubiquitous young person's sporting activity, male and female. You go around the world, there's martial arts everywhere. So I'm not surprised or shocked to see UFC 200. If I live long enough, we may see a UFC 30. I may see a UFC 30. I think that this is going to continue. It's only going to get bigger. It is the modern version of the Hunger Games. It really is an international phenomena. And I think as big as it is today, I wouldn't be shocked and be surprised to think in 10 or 20 years it would be even bigger.
Well, it is growing.
It's beautiful,
and,
it does grow every year.
And fortunately, it can change its pant size as it grows. So, there is no limit, it's...
Because, like you say in the book, I think Sean Wheelock mentioned it, the most poignant quote, the most poignant sentence in the whole book is the fact that you said, long after I'm gone, MMA will still be around. And, when I read it, I kind of was like, that. It's a combination of pride and sadness, because art won't be around forever, but then again, no one is. But then again, something that you've created does, and I thought, there's a sense of pride there, and it's a beautiful thing that, you've created a phenomenon, really. That's the best way to put it. That's kind of stuff like you've created an NFL, you've created an NBA. I
think what it is with all sports, there's been somebody create it, but fortunately for us, the creation was within our lifetime, and we've experienced it. We're not really picking up history books and we don't know all the fine details, but we can talk to the likes of yourself.
I used to say back in the day that when I was in the advertising business, that what I always took pride in was that I was creating jobs for the customers, for the clients that I had. For the they were attracting new customers, and it was a way for them to feed their families and to put their kids through school and to build and to buy a house. And so my excitement in creating the UFC is to know that there's now an industry that's worldwide. There are people who are training, teaching. There are gyms, there are promoters, there are clothing companies, there are journalists like yourself, like John and Mike's MMA.
There's not many like this.
There's not many like us. Journalists is a stretch,
and we're not making money.
We need a lot. We need a lot of attempts to write that word out.
But we know what you mean.
To show you that there's at least a path here, and that if you get 15,000 subscribers on a podcast, before you know it, you're in the advertising business. Really.
15's good. 15's a good day.
But I'm looking at the Kickboxer 2 Retaliation. They got David Bautista, Gina Carano, and George St. Pierre. I'm pleased to see that this thing continues to grow. We gave the film Kickboxer to our screenwriters and said, take a look at this, because this is what people thought the martial arts were before the UFC.
Yeah.
Back in '89, this is all that the fan knew was something like the film Kickboxer. Yeah. And since the MMA phenomena, now there's a new awareness of what martial arts really can be. If you can't grapple, if you can't, you're not involved in takedown and sprawling, and you don't understand reversals, and you don't understand Muay Thai and boxing, you don't understand what the martial arts became. So I'm very gratified today to see that this thing is spread worldwide. John McCarthy and I talk about this a lot, because he always gives me credit, and he did in the book when he wrote the foreword for Is This Legal? He says, I just came back from Japan. I just came back from China. I'm all over the world doing this. He said, if it wasn't for you, I'd still be a police officer with the LAPD in the United States. So I'm very gratified that there are so many people that are doing this either as a hobby, as a sport, as a business, as a profession. It's very gratifying to me to see that this has grown. Whatever legacy I have, I can always point to the UFC and say, something, at least once I hit a home run.
I was going to say, and I'm glad it was that one.
We didn't even talk that much about John McCarthy, how he's still involved, and also I didn't touch about was it John you gave the medal to? That's what I loved about that as well. The event was you designed that medal for the winner, and it was a beautiful medal that they got. Was it John you gave it to look after?
Yeah, John likes to joke. We did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, right after the UFC anniversary, November 12th, and John said to me, he says, I was Horion's bodyguard at UFC 1, and he was. Mm-hmm. Horion had asked John to bring his gun, his Beretta 94F, to Denver, because Horion and his cousin Hayulson, Carlos's eldest son, were involved in a lawsuit about the logo, the Gracie logo, the triangle logo, and Horion, I think, was worried about whether Hulson was going to show up with a gun in Denver. So he asked John to be his bodyguard. So John brought his gun to Denver, and when I knew he had his gun there, I gave him the medal. I said, John, you're guarding this medal the whole week. He teases me about it. He said, every time you saw me in Denver, you say, John, is the medal okay? Where's the medal?
He did.
Oh dear, I bet he was fed up with you. But yeah, it's.
I love
You're lucky you didn't give it to me. I would have just teased the hell out of you.
Honestly, ladies and gentlemen, there's so many little mini stories in the book that Art and Sean touch on and write about. Honestly, if you haven't got it, I seriously, honestly, I promise you, if you read it, you'll love it. Honestly, even though we all know what happened on UFC 1, it's not. It's the whole build up. It's basically from Art. It's basically Art growing up, how the whole thing came about. It's such a book worth reading and investing in. If you love MMA, the book is what you need to do. And also, you know, you can go on. I think it's on everywhere, isn't it? Art, you can get it on Amazon, and you can probably get it on your Kindle and all sorts, I imagine.
You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and the UFC's Fanatic.com online bookstore has it now. And, you know, I give full credit to Sean Wheelock, who really convinced me to focus the book on UFC 1 in that 4-year period that it took me to, you know, it was still an advertising client's idea, to the first event and then that Monsters Ball the night after the event. He was right about the fact that we needed to concentrate on the most important event in UFC history, the first event, because if that had flopped, we wouldn't be talking today.
No, that's the thing. Yeah, that honestly, that conga line at the Monsters Ball that you all had on is still going on right now.
Yeah. The first arse has got to be sexy. Otherwise, no one else is going to grab.
No. They had a conga line going on, and it's still going on now. And I tell you what, I don't think it's going to go anytime soon. We're gonna leave it there because I don't want to talk too much about obviously stories from the early days, because a lot of the stuff is in the book, and I think I could go into it with you in depth for a long time, because honestly, I'm addicted. I'm hooked on the MMA anyway, and I'm hooked on everything.
We could keep you busy until March.
We could, yeah. We could literally do it, my friend. But look, before you go, how can people go online and, you know, on social media? How can they get in touch with you if they want to maybe ask you a question, or just, you know,
send thank yous
and appreciation or anything like that?
You know, I'm available on Twitter. It's Art Davie. I'm available on Skype, UFC Creator 1, and I'm available online with the book. Has a website called isthislegalthebook.com, and there's a lot of stories and some additional information that we didn't include in the book. We couldn't get in the book. So if you want to find out what some of the alternate designs of the octagon were, go to isthislegalthebook.com, and I think fans will enjoy the information that's there. They can also contact me through that website, but I'm available on Facebook, Art Davie, on Twitter, Art Davie, and Skype on UFC Creator 1.
Honestly, you should just even just message this man and say thank you. You know, just a simple thing like that, because me and Mike, from the bottom of our heart, we say thank you.
Oh yeah,
this is
eternally.
Yes, this is not just an honour; it's a treat. It's an absolute. This is a great honour for us to be speaking with you, sir. Thank you so much for obviously the 4 years of effort and time that you put into it, and also thank you just for coming on to speak to us.
Well, John and Mike, I really enjoyed being on MMA Corner. You guys have a great podcast. I'd love to come on again. It's really been a pleasure to be here with you.
Art Davie, thank you very much, sir.